This is Steve Saltwick, and welcome to Your Brain, a Personal Tour, Seminar 5, The Neurogenesis of Human Culture. Today, we talk about the human brain in all its glory. The goal of the seminar will be to investigate and present the unique capabilities of the human brain that gave rise to the vibrant culture around us. We'll see that the truly unique aspects of the brain are few in number, just 3 capabilities in my opinion. Over thousands of generations, each one of those 3 capabilities had tremendous power to bring about the culture we experience today. These capabilities built upon the primate brain capabilities we covered in Seminar 4. The subtitle is about the skill of teaching, and it's an intriguing impact on the human brain and human culture. Teaching and pedagogy are underappreciated aspects of neuropsychological research. We'll see that they had a significant influence on our brain and culture as it developed, which is a wonderful way to begin a seminar to a class of lifelong learners. So welcome. I hope you enjoy the seminar. For those of you that enjoy the opening sequence, I present a roster of the images of 24 brains that changed the world, and their attributions for your reference. I challenge you to think about the images you would place on your personal slide of human culture. It's a fascinating exercise, and I encourage you to try it. For those of you who are interested in more information about these brains, I've published a seminar of my reasons for inclusion and some links for more information. I want to give a special thanks to Ms. Carol McGuire of the Quest Lifelong Learning Program at the University of Texas at Austin. She challenged me to include more women in the sequence. In fact, her first suggestion was all women, but I demurred on that one. From that challenge, I redoubled my effort to be as inclusive across as many dimensions as possible. I'm not there yet, but this sequence has benefited greatly from Ms. McGuire's suggestion, and I thank her for it. I've also added 2 new books to the reading list. The first, Two Heads, is the one book I hope all the people in the seminar will read. It is simply outstanding. Please do not let the format put you off. It is a graphic novel, but it's not a comic book. It is a serious presentation of how our brains work with other human brains by 2 of the foremost researchers in the field. I believe the authors will be a future Nobel Prize winner. The second book is a wonderful account of gesture, the first movements of language. There's fascinating information about how gesture can shape our thoughts and how it was the seed of the human unique capability for language. One of those 3 human capabilities can actually be experienced as you watch this video. As far back as 1944, researchers found they could evoke mental state attribution when viewers watched a silent animation of very simple shapes like triangles and circles. In this film, I see a mother triangle, the large red one, trying to convince her child triangle, the little one, to leave the nest. The mother coaxes her child out. The child is fearful of leaving the nest and must be, coached. In fact, even prevented from coming back at one point. Then the mother and the child experience the joy of playing outside the nest. Is that what you saw? Now I want you to think about that. We were watching 2 triangles. Your brain was projecting intention and emotion on lifeless but cute geometric forms. This is called mentalizing, and it's thought to be a key human trait. Your dog or cat does not do this. You may do it to your dog, but your dog does not do it back. As we shall see shortly, this trait sets up a massive amount of human cultural evolution. But let's introduce the other two human unique capabilities first. Here we see the three capabilities that I assert are unique to the human brain. 1. Mentalizing, and we've just talked about that. It's what your mind did to those triangles, and it's part of a repertoire called theory of mind. Your brain devotes significant resources in thinking about what other brains are thinking or feeling. This broad set of capability is termed theory of mind. We're going to call it TOM for short. Now, second, language. Yes, Alex the parrot can talk, and several primates can use sign language, but no other set of brains on this planet is so wired for language as the human brain. Human infants show amazing capabilities and behaviors that far outstrip any other species. And then finally, 3. Natural pedagogy is human communication and theory of mind specifically adapted for the efficient transmission of cultural knowledge among a generation and across generations. Knowledge that would almost be impossible to learn by imitation alone can be passed using pedagogy from one generation to the next. So that ever-expanding corpus of human knowledge can accumulate across thousands of generations. Hence, this gives us medicine, airplanes, iPhones, and unfortunately, telemarketing calls. In my reading of the literature, these three capabilities are the essential set of human unique traits which sets us apart from all other species. But don't forget, the human brain builds upon the expanded capabilities in the brains of our non-human primate ancestors. We covered those in Seminar 4. There were 4 of them: a multi-sensory evaluation of future outcomes, the learning of abstract categories, focused attention on a goal that was several steps removed from the current behavior, and strategies to deal with success and the unexpected. The human culture we experience today is a combination of the unique capabilities of our human brains with the foundational capabilities of our non-human primate ancestors. Now let's take a look at theory of mind, or mentalizing capability of your brain in more detail. And we're going to use an example. Think about the situation in perhaps an earlier stage of your life. You go to the laundromat to wash your clothes, and one day you go into the laundromat and you see this. A stranger taking your clothes out of the dryer. With only a few seconds of perceptual data about this stranger, a typical brain will mentalize. Maybe she's going to steal my clothes. Or maybe she's feeling amazingly generous and she just does this as a random act of kindness. Or maybe she falsely thinks the clothes are hers. This native capability to reason about other people's actions in terms of their mental states, their thoughts, their beliefs, their desires, emotions, and intention is called theory of mind. This capability is not present in newborn babies. It develops. Now, using a test called the false belief test, researchers can show that a typical human child develops a capacity for theory of mind around the age of 4. A false belief test probes whether the child can represent in their brain a false belief held by another brain, imaginary or real. Let's take 2 examples. The first will be from a 3-year-old undergoing this false belief test, and then a second will be a 5-year-old. Note the difference.
Yes!
This is Sally, and this is Anne. All right? Now, Sally comes in with her marble. Sally puts her marble into the basket and goes out. Anne comes and gets the marble, and she puts the marble in the box. Here comes Sally. Here comes Sally. Now, where will Sally look for the marble?
Go, Sally!
You got it for her! Hooray!
The ball in the box. Can you open the box for me? Can you close it? Joey decides to go outside. And then May takes the ball and she puts it in the basket. And then Joey comes back inside. And where do you think he'll look for the ball?
In here.
In there. Why will he look in there?
Because that's where I put the ball.
And where is it really?
In the basket.
On the basis of this test, it's clear that a 5-year-old human brain can understand the situation where a different brain, yes, an imaginary brain, but a different brain nonetheless, can have a false belief. This is a very consistent result. It is shown both in rural children and urban children, in Western societies, and it's also been found in Peru, India, Samoa, and Thailand. It has even been found in hunter-gatherer children in the Cameroon. There are differences in acquisition. Children presenting autism spectrum disorder show significant delays in the acquisition of this capability, and we'll discuss that later in a following seminar. Do non-human primates have theory of mind? David Premack, the legendary researcher on primate learning, and Doug Gillen, a UT graduate, reported one example of the theory of mind in the famous chimp Sarah, shown here at age 50. However, in the vast majority of past experiments, results have shown that non-human primates and other animals just do not have the capability, as shown on the previous video. But there are many things in science, and it's always not quite that simple. Recent research has shown tantalizing results for a theory of mind capability in non-human primates. These results have caused quite a stir in the research community. However, most results depending on measuring anticipatory looking, that is to say, measuring where and how long monkeys looked at experimental situations. We can't ask the monkey about what some other monkey is thinking, so we measure where he is looking. And when we do this, we get mixed results. Now, since this is my tour, you're going to get my story of how to interpret these results. I believe that the body of research tells us that theory of mind is a composite of at least 2 different kinds of perspective taking. Non-human primates and some other animals have what is termed level 1 perspective taking. Humans are the only animal to date that show level 2 perspective taking. Now, what's the difference? Well, let's take a look. Level 1 perspective taking is building a common view of space for 2 animals. Here, a woman sits on the far side of a blind. To her left, there's a chicken in plain view, but behind the blind is a kitten. The blind blocks her view of the kitten. An observer who has level 1 perspective ability, and is shown as Sherlock Holmes in the suit on the right, he can correctly deduce that the woman could see the chicken but cannot see the kitten, even though he can see the kitten. You may think this is obvious, but 2 to 3-year-old children often lack level 1 perspective taking. To show level 2 perspective taking, we have to set up a thought experiment. Now, in this experiment, I'm going to synthesize all the research on the topic. It may be make-believe, but it represents the clearest view I have as of today. I need to introduce the participants. Kaylee, one of our dogs, is the first participant, and you need to know she loves treats. Wiggin, our other dog, is the second participant, and you need to know Wiggin loves toys, much more than treats. So here's our experiment on level 2 perspective taking. Our participants will predict what will Wiggin choose, toys or treats. One of the participants will be Kaylee. And Kaylee for today is going to be granted the ability to talk. The other participant will be Becky, my wife. Okay, what does Kaylee predict? Kaylee goes, I love treats. Therefore, all dogs love treats. Therefore, Wiggin will choose a treat. Becky predicts Wiggin will choose a toy, since she knows Wiggin loves toys. What does Wiggin pick? The toy. Becky was able to see the choice like Wiggin sees the choice. She got inside his head and imagined thinking like he thought. Now that's level 2 perspective taking. Walk a mile in their shoes, or pause. Note that Kaylee believes all dogs think like her, and many do. But Kaylee just can't think about another dog thinking differently than her. Being able to think about someone else's perspective has massive impact on human culture. Some big ones are cooperative hunting. Early humans could coordinate their hunting. If you knew your hunting pal had the best shot to take down the prey, then you could assist by driving the animal to the best place for him to kill him. If you could imagine how a village boy was thinking about a problem, you could teach them more effectively. And finally, if you could think about someone else thinking, well, you would realize they could be thinking about you, and you would care what they're thinking about you. And voila, we have the grounds for reputation management. Theory of mind, level 2, is a major force in human culture, and beautifully but densely described in a book titled A Natural History of Human Thinking. It's by Michael Tomasello, a leading researcher in the field. If you're interested in this topic and you don't mind technical language, then this book is for you. If we scan the brain of humans during the performance of false belief tasks, we see the activation of a specific brain circuit as shown here. I highlight one area in particular called the temporoparietal junction, or TPJ for short. Note, there's significant activity on both sides of the brain when we scan during a false belief test. This circuit is activated when your brain has to consider another brain's perspective or belief. It's not activated when your brain considers a false photograph, say a picture of a signpost pointing in the wrong direction. This effect is very robust and has been replicated by many labs. Self-awareness and consciousness are major topics of brain research, and rightly so. A key question for the understanding of the brain is, how does consciousness arise? It's the hard problem of neuroscience, and one we must creep up on carefully. An intriguing result is that the recognition of your own face activates the theory of mind network. My interpretation of this effect is that one brain is reflecting on itself as another brain. This kind of processing by your brain may be impactful in the construction of the conscious experience, for it is the brain being aware of itself. Perhaps we should rewrite René Descartes' famous expression, "I think, therefore I am," into a slightly different formulation. I am aware of my thoughts, and therefore I am human. More research on this is clearly needed, but it's a promising area of research into human consciousness. We've talked a great deal about scanning human brains, and I want to make sure we're aware of the power and the limitations of the tool. The machine we use is called a magnetic resonance imager, or MRI machine for short. An MRI machine can image virtually any soft tissue of the human body. When we want to study the brain, we use a technique of MRI called functional MRI, a technique where we measure changes in energy metabolism, or blood flow, to indicate brain activation. This machine is rather daunting. It makes loud noises as it generates magnetic fields in order to measure blood flow. If you've never experienced one, it can be quite unsettling, and I have some sounds recorded to illustrate. Even with earplugs, the noises can be quite loud. Your skull is inside a donut, and it can be quite claustrophobic. Therefore, there's a running joke in neuropsychology that when you study functional MRI, you can get artifacts, as shown in this cartoon. The artifacts from performing an MRI during a memory task means that you just need to be careful. Functional MRIs can have artifacts, and we need to take them into account. The other big caveat is that we need to be aware that fMRI is correlation. Correlation is a mathematical measure of how two things vary together over time. It's a very useful measure in many studies. But just because two measurements vary together over time do not mean that one causes the other. Billy on the left is upset because every time the seatbelt sign comes on, the airplane ride gets bumpy. The graph on the right shows a highly correlated set of measurements. 1, films that Nicolas Cage appeared in, and 2, the number of people who drowned in a pool. One important rule in this area of study is correlation is not necessarily causation. Nicolas Cage films are not causing people to drown, and turning off the seatbelt sign won't stop airplane turbulence. We just need to be aware that as we look at correlational studies using fMRI, correlation is not causation. Theories about what is causing one variable to change with another are bolstered if we can use multiple types of data, say fMRI, stimulation, deactivation, etc., to all show the same effect. So don't get me wrong. fMRI is a powerful tool. We just need to be aware of its limitations as we look at human brain scans. A capability closely related to theory of mind, which we do share with many but not all animals, is the expression of empathy. Mother Nature has endowed many of our relatives with this social emotion, including primates, elephants, canines, in other words, dogs and wolves, but even some species of birds, like ravens and magpies, and some rodents, like these prairie voles shown here. As it turns out, there's a separate neural circuit for this kind of capability, different from the theory of mind circuit just shown. Let's explore that next. Now, empathy is the ability to share the feeling of another brain. If you scan the brain of a subject who is directly experiencing some kind of pain sensation, compare that scan to one where the subject is observing someone in pain, you will find certain high-level brain areas in common. They're shown here on the scan in orange. That means empathy truly is a vicarious experience. As Bill Clinton said, you really do feel their pain, at least at a high cortical level. Now, this circuit is separate from the theory of mind network circuit, but there are complications and overlaps. If you test for empathy, as shown on the lower right, which involves a married couple, one is in the brain scanner and one is outside the brain scanner, and you cue for pain in the abstract, for example, using arrows, brain activity shows in the empathy circuit and the theory of mind circuit. But if you cue with a concrete cue, for example, a prick to the hand or a stubbing of the toe, then the theory of mind network is not active, but the empathy circuit and the mirror network are active. We covered the mirror action network in Seminar 2. It's as if the motor act is being analyzed for its intention and planning is active on how to avoid this particular stimulus. So empathy is a complex, multidimensional process in your brain that can be modulated by surprising events. One of the most intriguing modulators of empathy is social. Let's take a study of one part of the circuit at a place called the anterior insula, shown by the red circle in this scan. Now we're going to do two things. The first is we're going to have subjects play an economic game with either fair or unfair research assistants before the brain scan. We then scan their brains as we apply pain to the research assistant who was participating. At least that's what the subject believes. There's really not pain involved here. But as it turns out, females are highly empathetic, and that's shown in the purple bars in the top half of this diagram. Females are less empathetic to an unfair player. But compare that to the males. Males are positively revengeful. Males have no empathy for an unfair player. In fact, they want to punish them. Alternately, we could measure empathy when the subject is either within or without a group. In this instance, we study males where membership in the in-group means that the subject and the research assistant are rooting for the same soccer or football team. Being a member of the out-group means rooting for a different soccer team. You can see that males are much more empathetic to members of their own group compared to members of an out-group. This effect is very consistent. It applies to females in different situations and can be called an us versus them effect. Us versus them effects are present in a wide variety of animals, including humans, and they bring about some very strange aspects of behavior. A wonderful story that illustrates this occurred on the set of a Hollywood movie, Planet of the Apes. Now, I'm old enough to remember well this movie. If you're not, hit the Google button. Actors had to eat lunch in their makeup, as was shown here. But there was a fascinating aspect to lunch. Actors representing chimps ate together. Actors representing gorillas ate together. And the same with orangutans. There wasn't a rule doing this. They just did it spontaneously. The us of the chimps did not want to eat lunch with the them of gorillas. Oh no. Now, in all likelihood, the actors were not primate racist. So what was going on? Well, it turns out that your brain has an ancient and fundamental neural pathway devoted to processing us versus them hallmarks. Now let's just look at a few of those hallmarks. To demonstrate that the neural pathways in your brain are fundamental, we can use reaction time experiments. In these experiments, an image is presented for about 1/10 of a second. The images are subliminal. The viewer is not certain they've seen anything in particular. We measure the influence of the presented image on subsequent tasks. If there's an influence, then we conclude there was an unconscious impact on brain processes. What kind of aspects influence your brain without conscious knowledge? Well, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and race. In each case, your brain is most sensitive to the dimension that is not you. In other words, if you're male, you react faster to female faces. If Asian, faster to non-Asian. African American, faster to Caucasian. Your brain instantly reacts to these dimensions via ancient pathways laid down by Mother Nature. From an evolutionary viewpoint, such reactions were clearly valuable. But in today's society, such reactions support the development of stereotypes and further the divide between us and them. Is there anything we can do to moderate this regress? Well, yes, and I want to use the automatic manual mode analogy again. I use a very effective ad campaign to capture the essence of the effort. Your brain has an automatic mode that quickly categorizes faces and other objects along an us, same as me, and them, different than me, dimension of gender, race, etc. In evolutionary times, this had survival benefit, and the brain pathways were conserved to the present day. The net effect is that these pathways support the development of stereotypes that can be counter to maximum productivity in current societies. The way to break through this is to bring in the deliberative processes of your brain to make an anonymous face a person. The more your brain considers the face of a specific person with attributes your brain can relate to, then the less you will get of a stereotypical behavior. Note, your old brain pathways are still signaling us, them, but the rest of your brain is overriding them with specific information that blocks or reduces stereotypical reactive behavior. And that's a good thing, and it's something we all can do. It's work, but it's worth it. Time now for Homer to join us and give us his thoughts. The first thing Homer says is he's incredulous that everybody doesn't think like him. In other words, Homer's stuck in level 1, perspective taking. Thankfully, Homer was not the first human. Level 2 perspective taking and thinking about the thoughts of others is a unique human skill as of today, and it underlies much of our culture. But ancient pathways useful for the emergence of human culture can give rise to stereotyping and other unhelpful behaviors. Thankfully, such behaviors can be overridden. They're still there, but moderated by perspective of other areas of the brain. Now let's turn our attention to the second unique aspect of human brains, the facility for language. No other species seems to be wired for language like humans, whether it's speech or gesture or writing like the Mayan glyphs. Our brains are endowed with a spectrum of language skills that are clearly the apex of animal capability. So let's see what that means in detail. Years ago, there was a simple story to the way your brain processed language. On the left side of your head, there were two areas that fundamentally process speech. Broca's area was responsible for how you said what you wanted to say, and Wernicke's area interpreted the speech that you heard. Note the path between the two, which bypasses the vocal cords. That's the path for the inner voice in your head. Today, this diagram is still mostly valid, but we need to change the words related to speech and hearing to words associated with communication. Because Broca's area is not only, a brain area that helps your brain figure out what to say out loud, it's also involved if you sign your speech, or even if you pantomime your speech, in this instance, opening a jar. Broca's area seems to be a pattern generator for motor programs to communicate either in speech, gesture, or pantomime. Likewise, Wernicke area is not just about hearing words, but also about reading words, or surprisingly pantomiming words, in this instance the phrase, "I've got it." This is a fascinating area of study right now. I want to emphasize that these language areas are not just about making the sounds of speech. They seem to be trying to communicate a thought via whatever motor program is most efficient or available in the communication path. In over 95% of the population, regardless of handedness, the majority of complex language processing is contained in the left hemisphere of your brain. We can use split brain patients to help us further understand how language is processed between the different halves of your brain. Split brain patients have had their brains transected or divided as a function of the treatment of epilepsy or some other neurological condition. Also recall that a brain half controls the contralateral side of the body. Therefore, the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body. The right side of your brain controls the left side of your body. With split brain patients, we can present separate pictures to each side of the brain and then query the subject for how they are processed. In one famous experiment shown here, a chicken foot was shown to the left half of the brain and a snow scene to the right. When the patient was then asked to pick out an appropriate picture with each hand. Since the right hand is controlled by the left brain, a rooster head was selected. Likewise, a shovel was selected by the left hand. The subject, when asked why he picked the shovel, didn't mention the snow scene. His left language area was not aware of it. He replied that you needed a shovel to clean out a chicken coop. The next panel shows that the right brain is not completely absent language skills. However, the right side skills are minimal. It can't process complex grammar, but it can read words. Here, the patient correctly read the words presented to the right brain and correctly performed the behavior. However, the left brain did not have knowledge of the word presented to the right brain, and when the subject was asked why they were laughing or walking, the patient basically made up a story. The story was not surreal. It was a rational explanation of behavior, just not grounded in the facts. We'll use these insights in our next seminar to explain some psychological disorders. Theory of mind attributes offer an excellent foundation for a framework of language. In such a framework, language is a tool for transmitting one brain's mental state to another brain. Speech is probably the most effective modality, but gesture, pantomime, and writing can also be effective. If this framework is reasonable, then we should see a coupling or synchrony between a speaker's brain and a listener's brain when we scan brains listening to a story. And guess what? That's exactly what we see. On the right side of this diagram, the areas in blue depict synchronization between the speaker's brain and a listener's brain when the speaker replays a story. The synchrony is reflected in correlation of brain scans. Yes, correlation is not necessarily causation, so it's appropriate to ask, are there other compelling results that show a coupling between a speaker's brain and a listener's brain? And yes, there are. In this experiment, there's one story. The story has been translated from English into Russian. Now there's two classes of listeners. native Russian speakers and native English speakers. The top part of the slide shows very little coupling between the brains of the two classes of listeners when just the Russian story is played. Coupling is shown in orange on the brain diagrams. However, if we play the story in Russian to the Russian speakers and we play the story in English to English speakers, there's significant correlation between the brains as shown in orange. The brains are locking on to the meaning of the storylines. You can see the same effect when people watch a movie together. Brains are synchronizing to the meaning of the story. Theory of mind circuits are active in language processing as the listener considers the mental state of the speaker. In this example, we scan the brains of a listener when they hear the phrase, "It's hard to give a good presentation." Now there's two preconditions. One, in the direct condition, the listener hears a simple direct question which requires no evaluation of the mental state of the speaker. Is it hard to give a good presentation? The answer is simple. Yes, it's hard to give a good presentation. It's a matter of fact. In the indirect case, the listener hears an ambiguous question, the meaning of which requires considering the mental state of the speaker. Did you like my presentation? Theory of mind circuits, especially the temporoparietal juncture, are active only in the indirect situation. Listener brains are always evaluating the incoming communication for triggers to consider a speaker's mental state. This assists the listener's brain in coming into the speaker's brain. Recent research has shown that there's an amazing similarity of the semantic maps between brains. Researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, published a dramatic map of the brain called a cartography of word meanings. I'm going to play the video of this presentation in just a minute, but I want to emphasize the finding. The meaning of words, the semantics, are grouped in similar areas across different brains. These groupings imply a common framework of meaning, at least for the brains of Berkeley students. It will be fascinating to see if this holds up across cultures different from Berkeley.
This is a map of someone's brain, showing roughly which areas respond when they hear different words. For example, there's a small area in the middle frontal gyrus that reliably responds to hearing the word top. But it's not just one word, one location. A single word can activate a whole range of different brain regions. So we find the word top in a bit of brain that seems to respond to words associated with clothing and appearances. But also here with numbers and measurements. And here with buildings and places. We usually think of language as being restricted to certain sections, like the temporal lobe. So researchers were surprised to find activity all across the brain and in both hemispheres. The map was made by scientists at the University of California, Berkeley. They put volunteers in an MRI scanner and had them listen to stories for 2 hours.
Back in the front again, deep, deep, and she pulls out a pack of matches that have been laundered at least once.
By monitoring blood flow to different parts of the brain, they worked out which places were responding to the meaning of the words, the semantics. They found that different bits of the brain responded to different kinds of words and concepts. And they could group them into rough categories, shown here by the different colours. Dark green bits, for example, were most activated by words to do with numbers, red bits by social words. Here in the right temporoparietal junction, this speck of brain, just a few millimetres across, was found to respond to words like wife, mother, pregnant and family. And this bit just next door responds to some of the same social words like family and wife, but also words to do with places and people like house and owner. Generally, the concepts represented in each brain region relate to other functions that scientists already know about. So words to do with how things look, such as stripes, are likely to be found near the visual cortex. And although each individual's map is different, looking at these three brains, it's clear that different people have the same kinds of concepts in the same kinds of places. This is the first time we've been able to map the semantic systems of the brain in such detail, discovering that words are grouped by meaning, and revealing just how complicated and widespread the word maps in our heads really are. And the brain map is available online for anyone to explore.
I draw your attention to the fact that there's a great similarity between the brains of different people as to where the meaning of a particular word is stored. Yes, each individual is different, but there was a surprising and significant congruence among the brains tested. Different people seem to store the meaning of a word in roughly the same place. We can use that fact to implement brain decoders to help us get a glimpse of some of the inner workings of the mind. Here we see the output of such a decoder when the subject is watching a movie clip. The decoder displays the words or phrases active in the brain of the viewer. Now, the decoder does not work perfectly, and I think you'll agree that this kind of analysis is fascinating, but frankly, a little troubling. Use of this technology has opened up a possibility that are not just frightening, but stupid. I show you a slide from one of Facebook developers' conferences. Facebook wanted to use brain decoders of information to allow you to tweet or send a message directly from your brain. You could think it, you could tweet it. Now that is a terrible idea in general, in my opinion. It could be used to help paralyze people, and we'll see about that later on, but not as a general function of social media. My goodness. Of more importance is the interest in fields of study that are enabled by this kind of research. The holy grail of semantic research is how are words and concepts stored in the brain. This kind of research has progressed our understanding in ways that are surprising. For example, we now know in all likelihood that the diagram on this slide, which is the leading candidate of how words and meanings and concepts are stored in the brain, is not correct. A computer programmer would say this diagram is a great theory of meaning. A brain scientist now would not. This model of your brain held that there was a rigid hierarchy in how concepts were stored. Specific information was stored at the lowest level, and more general information was stored at a higher level. A word or concept at one level of the graph would inherit all the properties of the elements above it. So, for example, a canary that can specifically sing is shown here, and since a canary is a bird, it can also fly, as shown here. And similarly, since it is an animal, it can move, and since it's a living thing, it can grow. While elegant as a computer model, this is just not the way your brain works. And as you might guess, it's a bit more complicated and messy, at least for my brain. Here's a diagram which I believe is much closer to the representation of words and concept in your brain. Nouns are called items, verbs are called relations, and they're associated to attributes with connections, which in real life are the neuron-to-neuron connections we saw in Seminar 1. Experience and learning, in other words memory, can strengthen or weaken the connections over time with the mechanisms we studied in Seminars 2 and 3. So let's take an example. The combination of an item, canary, and a relation, can, is related through a mess of connections to the appropriate attributes. Grow, move, fly, sing. These connections have been learned over time. This kind of structure is much more helpful in explaining the behavior of patients with a type of stroke which is called semantic dementia. This model is also very helpful in understanding how a normal brain works. Let's see how. The model of semantics, or of the meaning that we have been exploring, is expressed in brains with what is termed a hub and spoke system in your temporal cortex, in other words, by your temples. Of note, is that each attribute of an item, in other words, the concept or word, are individually expressed in the appropriate sensory or motor areas of the brain and then collected into a multimodal hub at the end of your temporal lobe. This kind of model has been very successful at explaining brain operations, and I want to emphasize two major points. First, the meaning of a word or concept is multimodal. It has aspects of sight, sound, and the other senses. It also has aspects of how it is used, its function, how it is gripped, praxis, and how it is pronounced. This is a critical insight in terms of the model of semantic memory. Second, the hub that receives all this information represents the concept as a sum of all the factors. This concept corresponds well to how the brain works normally, and when the hub is damaged, the patient may lose the memory of how to handle something. In other words, they've lost praxis, but they still know what it is when they look at it, or vice versa. And that's exactly the symptoms we see. So let me illustrate this model of the brain in operation. The hub and spoke network of the temporal lobe represents objects in a multimodal way with some kind of default organization. Here we see the objects categorized like we learned them in school: birds together, fish together, flowers together, and trees together. The function of this network in your brain is to represent objects, and it does that across all the sense modalities as well as many other dimensions, kind of like the type of motion. Now, if we give you or your brain a task to do, let's say sort those objects by the type of motion they have or by their color, we see a different area of your brain getting involved, the prefrontal cortex. That part of your brain is the control network. It represents the task or the rule to use. Here we show the two tasks: selection for the type of motion or selection for the type of color. Now this is amazing. It's a real window into how humans think, and there will be much exciting research coming in the near term. It's time for Homer now to weigh in. Homer points out two particular things. First, consider language a tool for transmitting the mental state from one brain to another. This transmittal can range from hard coupling, so that we're, quote, on the same page, to manipulation, for example, lying about your mental state. This is a theory of mind framework which has great utility for understanding our brain. Second, semantics, or the meanings of words in normal brains, seem to be stored in standard locations, at least amongst the brains sampled so far. Now, they're not all from the same cultures. More experiments are needed, and it'll be extremely interesting to see the results from varying culture or from and including psychological dysfunction. Now, there's a large body of research which concludes that humans are the only species which, as a whole, utilize a communication framework allowing and facilitating the transfer of knowledge to novices, not just family members, but widespread members of tribes or larger social groups. We're going to call this framework natural pedagogy, and we'll introduce its key characteristics in this last section. Those key characteristics are: 1, infants are wired to learn from birth onward. 2, theory of mind, language, and mirror circuits in the human brain make it possible to mirror the intent of the demonstrator, for example, in manufacturing tools. And 3, the rewarding effect of being understood enables a positive feedback cycle in pedagogy. This cycle gave humans an evolutionary advantage, which over thousands of generations resulted in the culture we see today. Now, this is the third element of uniqueness in your human brain. What in your brain and how does it work in terms of enabling natural pedagogy? The first capability shown by human infants for supporting pedagogy is sensitivity to what is called an ostensive gesture. This capability is present at 4 months of age and might even be present earlier. Ostensive gestures are gestures that signify intentional communication. A good example is direct eye contact or a raised eyebrow. Human infants are very sensitive to these gestures, as shown on this slide. The top tracing is an EEG brain scan of a 4-month-old infant under 2 conditions. The top row is the infant seeing a face with a diverted gaze, which then raises an eyebrow and smiles. As you can see, there's no significant EEG or brain activation. In the bottom row, it shows the reaction of an infant to the same eyebrow raise and smile, but this time the face is directly gazing at the infant. Both gestures significantly affect the EEG. Similar effects have been shown for other primary ostensive gestures. Motherese or baby talk is a good example. Net, the infant is barely out of the womb, but it's very much in tune with efforts to communicate with them. So, look directly at your infant grandkids and smile and coo and use baby talk. Tell your kids science says it's okay. By 6 months of age, an infant is reliably using ostensive gestures to initiate gaze following. In this example, an experimenter uses eye contact in the top row, or mother-ease baby talk in the bottom row, to signal an imminent communication, a direct gaze at one of 2 toys. If there's an ostensive gesture, eye contact or mother-ease hello, then the infant reliably follows the gaze towards the ball. If there's no ostensive gesture, in other words, no eye contact or no infant-directed greeting, then there's not gaze following. To ensure that the looking of the infant was equivalent between the 2 instances, a colorful cartoon was placed on the head of the experimenter. The flower-looking symbol you see on the top of the experimenter's head is to ensure the infant did not turn and orient it towards the experimenter, and that the situation was similar between eye contact and no eye contact. By age 9 months of age, the infant has mastered the distinction between an ostensive pointing movement and a simple reaching for an object. In this experiment, the infant observes an experiment either reaching for an object or pointing to an object. Following this, the infant's view is blocked for 5 seconds, during which time the object is either moved to a different place or changed to a different object. Then the screen is removed and the infant observes again. In the reaching situation, the infant will notice a change in position, but not a change in the object itself. The interpretation here is that the infant understood the intention of the motor act of reaching, but it didn't attach any importance to the object. In the pointing example, the infant was surprised and looked longer if the object was changed. The ostensive gesture of pointing signaled that the object was important, and therefore any change in the object was significant. These capabilities set the stage for pedagogy. A good way to see the impact is to look at tool making in the Stone Age. This slide shows a simple stone cutting tool that was found in the historical record of about 2 million years ago. The tool is classified as Oldowan, and it is very, very crude. It's made by flaking chips off a coarse stone with strikes of a hammerstone. Research in the lab has demonstrated that non-human primates like chimpanzees can create Oldowan tools merely by imitating the striking movements of the hammerstone as demonstrated by a tool maker. There's no need for ostensive gestures. There's no need for understanding the intention of the demonstrator. It's simply a matter of imitation. And that was probably the state of play 2 million years ago. Between 2 million and 700,000 years ago, tool making evolved to the diagram you see on this slide. 2 workers cooperate to work on a much more advanced stone cutting tool called an Acheulean blade. An example of the blade is shown on the top right. The blade is far more effective than previous Oldowan tools. It can be hafted, in other words, attached to a pole or a handle to form a very effective killing weapon. With such a weapon, larger prey could be killed and consumed. The important part here is that research has shown that merely imitating the motor act of a demonstrator will not produce a good tool. The intent of the tool maker needs to be copied. The sharp edge to be fashioned will vary from core stone to core stone. Imitation will simply not cut a good tool. When we scan the brains of people making such a tool, we see activity in the mirror system, as shown in the red circle here, as well as the prefrontal cortex. In previous seminars, we've seen that these are areas of your brain that support goal-directed behavior and the replication of the intent of the motor actions. Now, at this stage of evolution, both workers have brains with a theory of mind and language. The intent of the tool maker can be communicated with speech or gesture or pantomime. This is an act of pedagogy. They give tool makers evolutionary advantage over generations. Scientific discussions are only just now considering the impact of pedagogy. Imitation can explain much of the evolution of our species, but complex and difficult to master skills like stone tools, pottery making, textile making, and cooking require guidance and the control of learning. By being wired from birth, wired to learn from birth, by having brains that consider the perspective of other brains, and by being rewarded for being understood, humans are wired for pedagogy, and pedagogy evolved for the betterment of the species, betterment of diet, of longevity, and of culture. I want to pause here and emphasize just how much our culture depends on pedagogy. I present a perceptive quote from an excellent Scientific American article on this topic. Humans can go to the moon while chimps work on termite mounds because of the capacity to teach the next generation skills and culture. From an evolutionary point of view, the emergence of human culture and pedagogy happened one eye blink ago, but it is having a profound impact. In my opinion, culture is similar to a self-sustaining chemical reaction, and now it's an evolutionary force in our development. So Darwin's theory of evolution is expanded to natural selection and cultural selection. These forces have endowed humans with unique capabilities, the ability to transform the planet for good or for worse. Human culture means we are creatures of our own making. It is up to us on how we use it. One final note. Natural selection works with eons, thousands and millions of years. Cultural selection works with centuries, way, way faster. We should always be aware that parts of our brain were evolved millions of years ago when our ancestors were hunter-gatherers. Those parts of our brains, for example, the us-them circuits, may react negatively and emotionally to regional cultural innovations. Let's, for example, capitalism. Whether you, as I do, believe capitalism is a public good or not, we all need to understand that we need to use all of our brains to determine whether something is a public good. Using our theory of mind to understand the perspectives of many brains will help all humans cope with the impact of cultural evolution. Recall the example of using all your brain to interpret the ad from earlier in the seminar. By engaging your theory of mind circuit, you gained insight and empathy. Use that approach when we discuss aspects of our shared culture. Whether you agree with that aspect of the culture or not, it will help us get to better decisions about what to do next. It's time for Homer to make his final appearance in this seminar. Homer has two simple points to make. The first, humans are born wired to learn. This is an essential element and a driver of our evolution and culture. The second point is that pedagogy is truly a divine calling. It was and is essential to the positive development of human culture. Even though it may be used to take people to the dark side, its impacts are underappreciated in the research literature, both in terms of human neuropsychology and anthropology. Further scholarly research will be much appreciated in order to better understand this element of our evolution and culture. This concludes Seminar 5, and I hope you enjoyed it. In Seminar 6, our final seminar, we'll talk about how the ecosystem of your brain can go wrong, from aging, from damage by stroke, from miswiring. I promise it won't be a downer. We'll also cover the most recent research on repair of function. There are many reasons to be excited about this area, while admittedly still much to do. The subtitle of the seminar is Dog Walking and the Jedi Monkey. You'll have to wait on the Jedi Monkey bit, but you will be amazed what dog walking can do to repair an aging brain. I look forward to joining you again in Seminar 6. I thank you for your attention. This is Steve Saltwick.